Hello once again from the Prim Reaper. Let's go ahead and start the new year off with another episode on the APA Guidelines for Men and Boys. Today we're going over Guideline 5. Guideline 5. Psychologists strive to encourage positive father involvement and healthy family relationships. Okay, good stuff. The importance of fathers in children's lives is a fact that is backed up by a great deal of research. I talk with many clients about effective parenting strategies and also deal with a lot of concerns around access to children due to custody and parental alienation matters. This is an important subject, and I would love to see it be treated with the respect it deserves. Can the APA guidelines do that? Well, I hope so, but let's find out. There are about 70 million fathers in the United States. Nationally representative samples suggest more than 80% of fathers report being involved in their children's lives, but little more than half of fathers believe they are doing a very good job as parents. Thus, for many fathers, the acceptance of new familial and relationship roles is of particular salience and may include a variety of difficult transitions and responsibilities. Many fathers are unsure about how to be directly involved with their children, given that mothers continue to be the primary caregivers and social services tend to be mother-focused in terms of parenting education and support programs. Further, most parenting support programs originate from white middle-class values that do not automatically recognize different cultural attitudes toward child-rearing. Additionally, the traditional paternal breadwinner role is less entrenched in modern families, and is giving way to a new focus on the father as a more involved, available, and equal co-parent. I feel like it would have been interesting here to have a more thorough breakdown as to why such a large percentage of fathers feel as though they are doing less than a good job as parents. They give a few brief, surface-level examples, but when actually helping people who are experiencing any kind of doubt as parents, men or women, you're going to want to find out the reasons around why. For example, one father may find difficulty in navigating their role in conjunction with the mother, but another may struggle with ideas around discipline, or around not growing up with a positive father figure in their own lives, or about worrying how to manage a high-conflict divorce situation and minimize their child's exposure to conflict. You can see how all of these subjects impact healthy family relationships and how having guidelines around how to navigate situations like these would be helpful for therapists. But hey, this is just the introductory paragraph. Maybe they get into all of this stuff in a little bit. Let's move on. Father involvement has been defined as having three components that include positive engagement activities, e.g., more intensive interactions that promote development, warmth and responsiveness, e.g., the ability to respond to the child's needs with warmth and caring, and control, e.g., parental monitoring and knowledge of child and child whereabouts, including involvement decisions about monitoring. Two auxiliary domains are indirect care, e.g., activities for the child that are necessary without the child being present, such as providing food and clothing and scheduling healthcare appointments, and process responsibility, e.g., taking initiative to care for the child rather than waiting for someone else to do so. There's something that seems odd to this section that, at the time of writing it, I was admittedly having a bit of a hard time putting my finger on it. I think the main thing is just that it seems oddly clinical to break down the role of a parent this way. I suppose there's technically nothing wrong with trying to categorize different elements of parenting, but this is hardly something exclusive to father involvement. I know there's the old emotional labor chestnut of the father not doing things around the house unless asked, but as I've discussed before, this is less a function of men versus women and more a function of who is performing what role. For example, on my particularly long workdays, I find I'm spending less time taking initiative with the kids because I don't know what's already been done that day or not, and rather than spend my limited breaks trying to figure it out, I'm trusting that my husband or whoever else is caring for them at the time is doing so in a way that makes sense. And again, as I've talked about before, it's relevant to mention that different people will have different priorities with regard to child rearing, and this should ideally be discussed well in advance of having children in the first place. For example, if someone is going to be a helicopter parent and structure every element of their child's lives, they're probably going to clash with someone who wants to take a more hands-off approach. To add even another layer to it, you'll find that if you have more than one child, they may require a different parenting approach between them. As you can see, it's a complicated subject that is difficult to break down into such a straightforward set of components. I can understand why someone might want to do so. It probably feels easier addressing pieces of parenthood at a time like this, but you're rarely going to capture the total experience this way. Now, I've been talking about most of a whole paragraph here, but the way it ends is frankly the verbal equivalent of someone suddenly swerving across a 5-lane highway to reach a sudden exit. Father involvement is a function of an intersection between race or ethnicity and cultural ideologies. Like, what? Where did that come from? What, frankly, does that even mean? Don't get me wrong, I know what they're probably trying to mean, but the way they're going about it both here and in the next paragraph is, well, yet again from the same social justice ideological viewpoint that I've always criticized. Let me rattle off just a few quick points from the next large section to illustrate what I mean. Sociocultural factors such as increasing rates of women entering the paid labor force and the shifting structure of American families from predominantly married two-parent households to a wider variety of family compositions may be contributing to the evolution of new fathering behaviors and roles. In many African American communities, there are higher rates of single-parent, women-led households, but African American fathers are increasingly documented as being involved with their children. Fathers who fall outside the dominant construction of white, able, and heterosexual may face additional barriers to their social inclusion with their children. Issues related to ethnicity, socioeconomic status, ability, sexual orientation, immigration status, language, and religion, among other factors, can present barriers that limit fathers' level of contact and engagement with their children, as well as their visibility in debates about fatherhood. See, I don't exactly know how best to phrase it, but it's like they can't keep their hands out of that cookie jar of blame, fault-finding, and assumptions. I feel like this could be a great example of how you could, if you wanted to, talk about a subject rationally without turning to finger-pointing and a fixation on overt traits. Let's see if we can't come up with a few examples. North American culture, being a society of relative freedom and tolerance for differences, often sees a careful balancing act between societal expectations of appropriate fatherhood roles, and indeed parenthood as a whole, and of different cultural expectations that may influence said parenting processes. Changing financial pressures that often necessitate both parents working to pay the bills has resulted in a diffusion of roles between mothers and fathers. Different cultural backgrounds may impact the level of presence that fathers may have in their children's lives, ranging from devaluation of the father in the family structure, expectation that the father prioritizes the family finances over spending time at home, or seeing a father as an equal partner to the mother with equal levels of active parenting responsibility. Do you see how each of these examples still talks about the importance of recognizing sociocultural influences in fatherhood without acting like there is some kind of fault or assuming experiences across any one cultural group? The way we go about having these conversations is extremely important, not only for our effectiveness as therapists, but for our ability to properly work with and support our clients. I don't understand how these people don't see how bad it is to create a class of psychologists that base their work on biases and assumptions. Yes, it is wise to be aware of trends and differences between certain regions of the world to be prepared to address them if they come up in therapy. It is not wise to have a Black client step into the room and assume anything about his fathering behaviors, or lack thereof, because of the color of his skin. And do we not see how talking about different backgrounds such as ethnicity, immigration status, religion, etc., as solely presenting barriers or limiting visibility, rather than suggesting they could lend any positive or protective factors, is unnecessarily restrictive as well? These people are blinded by their own victimhood hierarchy. It's embarrassing. But before I sound like I'm going to go entirely postal on this guideline, you may be as surprised and pleased as I was to see that there actually were several positive sections in here that totally align with a healthy approach to this topic. Father involvement for resident and non-resident fathers has been consistently linked to positive child outcomes. Longitudinal studies continue to support early findings of the positive influences father involvement has on children's behavioral, psychological, cognitive, and financial stability. For non-resident fathers, children's well-being is tied less to fathers' general behaviors, spending time or money, and more to being involved in activities with their children that nurture the father-child relationship. Becoming a father can be a time for growth by resolving wounds from a man's own father, and for reinventing fatherhood, or at least trying to become the father one always wanted. Paternal identity has been positively correlated with generativity, which is concern for future generations, and thus important for fostering healthy family relationships. Correlational evidence has found a positive association between parenting involvement and positive changes in new fathers' health, e.g., psychological well-being. A longitudinal study that tracked males from boyhood to fatherhood, ages 11 to 31, revealed that following the birth of their first biological child, criminal behavior and tobacco and alcohol use all decreased among new fathers. First-time fathers have reported positive changes in their relationships with health professionals, friends, and family, an increased sense of responsibility, and a more united relationship with their spouse. Other studies have found that first-time fathers begin to wear their seatbelts more often, learn new parenting skills, and engage in positive co-parenting practices, less risk-taking behaviors, and more self-care activities. However, some men experience difficulties in the transition to fatherhood. Postpartum depression affects roughly 10% of fathers in the 3 to 6 month period following birth and is associated with more negative and fewer positive parent-infant interactions. Wow, I'll be darned. This represents almost a full page that talks, without any weird caveats, about the positives for both children and fathers for active father involvement. They even talk about the fact that men can experience postpartum depression, which is an oft-overlooked topic for men. I was legitimately impressed, and I'd like to give thorough credit where credit is due. Well done on this section, APA. A stopped clock is right twice a day. Let's quickly go over the application section now. Provided that positive paternal engagement and inclusive communication tend to have long-term emotional and psychological benefits for both children and fathers, psychologists strive to promote healthy father involvement and father engagement in treatment with their children and families. Psychologists can promote strengths of father involvement. For instance, active play and physical exercise with their children have been linked to higher levels of father involvement and better child health. So far, no complaints. At the structural and institutional level, psychologists can help fathers eliminate custodial, legal, psychological, e.g., depression, anxiety, substance abuse, alcohol abuse, low self-efficacy, interpersonal, e.g., relationship discord, conflict with a co-parent, communication, and economic barriers to their positive involvement. I do like how this talks about the many barriers that fathers face to their involvement, including custodial and legal barriers. I really would have liked to see them expand upon this and talk more about some of their ideas for exactly how psychologists can go about doing this. This is not only from a "this would benefit the profession of psychology" standpoint, but also from a personal standpoint, in that I often find myself wondering, quite despondently, how to help fathers who are facing things like biased legal systems and unequal parenting agreements. I would hope that if we honestly acknowledge and promote the research that shows just how important father involvement is to healthy child development, we would start to see less bias against fathers in the courts and more of a movement toward equal shared parenting. But unfortunately, I'm still seeing a lot of resistance to this idea in practice. Psychologists can also support kinship structures that provide father figures for gay adults. Seems like a bit of a random and oddly specific add-on there, but sure, assuming I ever encounter a gay client who expresses a need for such a thing, why not? Fathering programs are a valuable component of family life education. Psychologists can identify institutional resources to promote positive fathering. Psychologists can employ special parent education curriculums to prepare expectant fathers for the challenges, duties, and joys of fatherhood. Specialized programs can be used with particular populations such as teenagers and incarcerated fathers. Definitely support this, and in fact have just completed training to hopefully begin doing exactly that myself in a few short months here. All right, that marks the end of this guideline. I gotta say, all told, a surprising majority of this guideline was totally reasonable, with a strong focus on the many ways in which fatherhood is healthy and positive for both fathers and children alike. In my experience, most people that you talk to are relatively in agreement on the importance of this point, and this is one of the most effective vectors through which to get people to actually care about men's mental health. I'm still waiting for the day in which people begin to care about men just because they deserve care themselves, but alas, in the meantime, I'll just keep promoting and practicing that idea myself. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one.